My name is Gavin, and I'm 33 years old. If you had told me 5 years ago that my own family would one day try to kick me out of the house my grandparents left me, without so much as a warning or an ounce of shame, I probably would have laughed it off. We were never the Brady Bunch, but I didn't think we were the kind of people who would stage a fake eviction over brunch. Turns out, I severely overestimated both their loyalty and their intelligence. The house I live in isn't just a house. It's the one constant in my life that ever felt safe. My grandparents raised me here from the time I was 10. My dad took off before I was born, and my mom, well, she was always around, but never really there. She liked to pop in for birthdays and Christmas, sometimes with a new boyfriend or dramatic story about why she couldn't stay long. But my grandparents? They were steady, loving, predictable in the best way. When they passed, Grandpa first, then Grandma a year later, I was devastated. Losing them was like losing the only real family I had. But they left me the house and a $1.2 million inheritance, split between liquid assets, bonds, and a few stocks I couldn't pronounce, let alone understand. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office feeling like a fraud, wearing a wrinkled button-up and trying to make sense of words like beneficiary and disbursement. What I did understand was that Grandma and Grandpa wanted me to be okay. And for once, I finally was. But peace is rarely permanent when you have a family like mine. The money wasn't something I advertised. I'd always been the quiet one, the background kid at family events, and I wanted to keep it that way. I paid off the house, moved everything into a private trust on my lawyer's advice, and started living modestly. I still drove my beat-up 2011 Civic, still wore the same 3 jackets I'd had since college, and still clipped coupons out of habit. Maybe that's why they thought I was vulnerable. Like I didn't know how the game worked. It started subtly. My brother, Shane, 4 years younger, louder, always acting like he was auditioning for a reality show, started checking in more often. He'd stop by unannounced, poke around the living room, and make casual comments like, "This place could be worth a fortune, huh? Or you ever think about downsizing?" Once, I caught him taking pictures of the kitchen and texting someone, but when I asked about it, he waved me off and said he was helping a friend who wanted ideas for a remodel. I didn't push. That's always been my weakness. I let things slide. I give people too much benefit of the doubt. But something felt off. Then Mom started coming around again. She hadn't visited the house in over 2 years, but suddenly she was stopping by with casseroles and fake smiles, saying things like, "I miss the old days. This house just feels like home, doesn't it?" She even offered to help decorate, which, if you knew my mom, was code for throwing out anything sentimental and replacing it with glass furniture and scented candles shaped like seashells. I kept my responses polite but distant. "Thanks, but I've got it covered." "No need, but I appreciate it." Still, they kept pushing. Shane started asking if I'd ever gotten around to updating the deed, an oddly specific question for someone who barely graduated high school and once tried to claim you could use your Costco card as ID. It was a Tuesday morning when everything shifted. I had just come back from my usual jog, same route, same time, earbuds in, ignoring the world. When I got back to the house, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked at the curb. Black SUV, tinted windows, New York plates. I walked up the driveway and saw Shane standing there with Mom, both of them dressed a little too formally for a surprise visit. She wore a long beige coat and carried a manila envelope, like she thought this was a scene in a courtroom drama. Shane just looked smug, the kind of smirk he used to wear in high school right before snitching on someone to the principal. "Morning," I said cautiously, brushing sweat off my forehead. "Gavin," Mom said, tone dripping with fake warmth. "We were just in the neighborhood and thought we'd swing by." "With a lawyer?" I asked, nodding toward the guy standing beside them, who was now holding out the envelope. "That's irrelevant," Shane cut in. "Look, this is awkward, but it's better we handle this now. We've gone ahead and had the deed transferred. You've got until Friday to pack up." I stared at them for a few seconds, processing. I didn't take the envelope. I didn't say anything. I just looked at both of them. The mother who'd never bothered to come to my high school graduation, and the brother who once pawned our uncle's watch for concert tickets. And I smiled. "You really think I didn't see this coming?" I said quietly. Their faces twitched, just slightly. Shane shifted on his feet. Mom blinked twice like her contact lens had moved. The lawyer stayed quiet, though he looked increasingly unsure of himself. "Gavin, this doesn't have to be ugly. Mom said, slipping into her patronizing tone. It's just, well, it's a family property. Your grandparents would have wanted all of us to share it. That's funny, I said, because I was there when Grandpa told you never to step foot in this house again after you tried to steal from his medicine cabinet. Her expression soured. That was years ago, and nothing's changed, I replied. They didn't argue much after that. Just told me to be out by Friday, as if it were already done, as if I wouldn't fight back, as if they hadn't just made the biggest mistake of their lives. The moment they left, I called my attorney. We'd been preparing for this possibility for months. I hadn't said anything to my family, of course. I didn't even tell my friends. But when Shane started sniffing around the deed and Mom started visiting unannounced, I knew it was only a matter of time. So I worked quietly, filed the right paperwork, transferred ownership of the house into a private trust, and ensured that not only was the property legally protected, but that any attempt to claim or transfer it without my authorization would be considered a legal violation, which is exactly what they'd just done. I spent the next 2 days in quiet anticipation. I didn't confront them. I didn't send any warnings. I just waited. And on Thursday morning, right around 9 a.m., they came back with a moving truck. Shane stepped out of the passenger seat wearing sunglasses, clearly trying to channel some kind of smug power move. Mom followed behind, speaking animatedly to the movers, probably explaining how her family had always owned the place. But they all froze when they reached the driveway, because standing there, calm, collected, arms folded, was my attorney. And he wasn't alone. He had 2 uniformed officers with him, both holding clipboards. My attorney, Mr. Randall, was a quiet, sharp-eyed man in his 50s who rarely raised his voice, but always made people listen. He gave Shane and Mom a brief nod, like he might to someone he barely remembered from a high school reunion, then calmly stepped forward and handed a thick packet of papers to the so-called lawyer my family had dragged in. "Good morning," Mr. Randall said coolly. "You are in violation of Civil Statute 83.041 regarding unauthorized transfer of trust-protected property. This house is not, nor has it ever been, within your legal right to claim, transfer, or occupy." Shane's smirk cracked first. "What are you talking about?" he snapped, taking a step forward. "We filed the paperwork. It's done." Mr. Randall didn't even blink. "Incorrect. What you submitted was a fraudulent transfer form, signed with a forged authorization. We've already flagged it with the county records office and filed an emergency injunction. As of this moment, any attempt to step foot onto this property with intent to take possession is considered trespassing. And given that you've involved third-party movers, that could extend to charges of attempted unlawful eviction." The movers looked very uncomfortable now. One of them, a tall guy with tattoos on both forearms, slowly backed away from the truck and muttered, "We're out, man. We don't deal with legal drama." Within 30 seconds, both movers were back in the truck, reversing down the driveway like it was on fire. I stood on the porch with my arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. I hadn't said a word yet. I didn't need to. I'd already played my part. This moment was for them to absorb, and I wasn't about to take it away from them. Mom, realizing her little scheme had just collapsed like a wet paper bag, tried switching tactics. "Gavin, honey, let's not blow this out of proportion," she said, her voice sugar-coated with fake concern. "We just thought, well, you've got the place all to yourself, and it felt like time to share the family legacy. You don't even use half the rooms." I tilted my head. "Is that why you tried to steal it?" "It wasn't stealing," she insisted. "It was just a misunderstanding." Mr. Randall cut in again, this time pulling out a second folder and handing it to the officer beside him. "This document outlines the emergency protective order and injunction filed against Mrs. Evelyn Maynard and Mr. Shane Maynard. The judge signed it this morning. You are both legally barred from approaching this property, contacting Mr. Gavin Maynard in relation to the estate, or attempting any further property claims. Any violation of these terms will result in immediate arrest." "You've got to be kidding me," Shane growled. "We're family. You can't just lock us out." "Family doesn't mean free pass," I said, finally speaking. "You tried to throw me out of the house I grew up in, because you thought I'd be too stupid or soft to stop you." He took a step closer. "This isn't over." The officer moved between us immediately, holding up a hand. "Step back, sir. This is your only warning." Shane glared at me, then at Randall, then at the house. I could see the gears in his head turning, but there wasn't anything left to grab. He had no leverage, no plan B, just a bruised ego and a whole lot of paperwork working against him. They left a few minutes later, but not before Mom turned around one last time on the front steps. "You think you're so clever," she hissed. "But when you're old and alone in that big, empty house, don't come crawling back." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She wanted a reaction, and I wasn't about to give her one. Instead, I stood there silently until their car disappeared down the street. Then I exhaled. It wasn't just relief. It was something deeper. Vindication, maybe. The kind you only feel when you've been underestimated your whole life and finally get to say, without words, "You were wrong about me." Back inside, the house was quiet again. Still. Safe. I sat on the living room couch. Grandpa's old recliner in the corner still looked the same, and let it all sink in. The months of preparation, the years of swallowing insults, being treated like the spare son, the invisible one, and now this. But I knew it wasn't over yet. You see, while they were busy trying to steal the house, they forgot something more important: the money. And that part of the plan was just getting started. The thing about people like Shane and my mom is that they assume silence equals weakness. That if you're not loud, you're not dangerous. If you're not confrontational, you're easy to beat. What they didn't realize, what they never realized, is that staying quiet doesn't mean I wasn't paying attention. I've been taking notes for years. After they drove off, I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just got back to work. The house was secure, the injunction was in place, and now it was time to make sure they couldn't come after anything else. Because I knew them. Losing the house wasn't going to stop them. They'd just shift focus. The inheritance, the accounts, anything with a dollar sign on it. They didn't care about the home, not really. They cared about what it represented: leverage, control, a way to make me feel small again. And I wasn't giving them another inch. That night, I opened a locked drawer in my home office and pulled out a red binder. Inside were printouts, receipts, letters, and emails I'd kept over the years. Most people would have tossed them in the trash. Passive-aggressive birthday cards with guilt-tripping messages, emails with urgent requests for small loans, and texts from Shane full of backhanded compliments like, "Must be nice not to have real responsibilities." I had everything. Even screenshots of a family group chat I was never supposed to see. One where Shane joked that I was basically a walking ATM with no spine. That one stuck with me. I also had bank statements, ones that showed where small amounts of money had been accidentally pulled from one joint account I had with Mom before I wised up and closed it. She'd brushed it off as a mix-up at the time, said she forgot. She wasn't authorized to use it anymore. But it wasn't a mistake. It was a test. She wanted to see if I'd push back. And when I didn't, she took that as permission to keep trying. But now, I had the paper trail. And more importantly, I had a plan. The next morning, I called Mr. Randall again. He didn't even sound surprised. "I figured you'd follow up," he said. "I assume you're ready to take the gloves off." "Completely," I said. "Let's start with asset shielding. Everything." We spent the next 2 hours on the phone. Step by step, we moved through the checklist. Every asset, real estate, stocks, bank accounts, digital investments, got moved under the trust umbrella. We closed out my old checking account and opened a new one with a new bank in another state under the name of the trust. I authorized only myself and Mr. Randall to access anything over $500. It felt paranoid, sure, but I wasn't about to be blindsided again. Then came the good part. See, most people assume trust funds are just a way for rich people to avoid taxes. And sure, that's part of it. But they can do a lot more, like protect you from lawsuits, or allow you to create stipulations on inheritance. That afternoon, I made my first change to the family trust that had been passed down from my grandparents. I removed my mother and my brother as contingent beneficiaries. Permanently. They'd always assumed that once I was gone, whenever that might be, they'd swoop in and collect what was left. That I'd get old, or sick, or make a mistake, and they'd be right there to pick the bones clean. But not anymore. Now, if anything happened to me, the estate would go directly to 2 children's hospitals and a nonprofit legal defense fund my grandfather supported for veterans. I knew it would have made him proud. But I wasn't done. There was one more thing, one card I hadn't played yet. I mentioned earlier that Shane had a habit of running his mouth. Well, one of his worst decisions was bragging to a friend about how he was getting the house soon, how he'd already been in talks with a shady real estate contact about flipping it. What Shane didn't know was that the guy he was bragging to, he owed me a favor. A big one. A week prior to the whole confrontation, I asked that friend, let's call him Jason, to casually record a few of their conversations, just in case things escalated. Jason wasn't exactly thrilled about it, but after I reminded him about the time I paid off the remainder of his student loans without asking for anything in return, he agreed. What Jason gave me was gold. In one audio clip, Shane was heard saying, "He's clueless, man. Like, he just sits in that house all day like a retired librarian. Mom and I are just gonna get the deed flipped, and then we'll rent the place until we sell it. We'll offer him a few grand to leave if he makes a fuss. Worst case, we fake some overdue taxes or unpaid repairs. People like him. They fold. People like him." I saved the recording on 3 different devices and sent it to Mr. Randall with the subject line, Exhibit A, Proof of Intent. By Friday, we'd filed paperwork to begin a preemptive civil case, not just against Shane, but against Mom as well. Fraud. Attempted unlawful seizure of assets. Potential conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. And depending on how generous the judge felt, identity theft too. But that's when something unexpected happened. Late Saturday night, I got a knock on my door. Not loud, not urgent, just 2 soft taps. I checked the camera feed on my phone and saw Mom standing alone on the porch, arms crossed, looking like she'd aged 10 years in a week. No Shane, no smugness. Just her, wearing that same beige coat, makeup faded, eyes puffy. I didn't open the door. She knocked again, then stepped back and looked up at the camera. "Please, Gavin. Just talk to me." I didn't move. "I didn't know Shane would take it this far," she said. I thought maybe we could work something out. As a family." That word again. Family. Always tossed around when they needed something. She sniffled. "I just don't want to lose everything. I messed up. Okay, I messed up. But you've got to understand, things haven't been easy for me either. You were always the favorite. You got the house, the money, the love. I just wanted a piece of it. Something." There it was. The truth, raw and ugly. But I didn't open the door. Because as much as I wanted to believe that somewhere in her was the mom I used to imagine she'd become, the woman in front of me wasn't here for redemption. She was here because she'd been caught. And I knew better than to let her back in. Not this time. So I stood there quietly, watching through the glass as she waited, and then slowly walked away. And that's when I made the final decision. The one move that would make this entire game end on my terms. I made the final decision that Sunday morning, just as the sun was creeping over the edge of the porch and casting golden light across the hallway rug, one my grandmother had made by hand. The same one Shane once spilled a beer on and laughed about. I remember kneeling beside it, tracing the stitches, and knowing what I had to do. Enough was enough. I wasn't going to keep playing defense. They tried to steal my home, humiliate me, use me like a living piggy bank, and now my mother was showing up at my door with some half-hearted apology disguised as guilt. No, that wasn't remorse. That was fear. Fear of what came next. And I made sure she was right to be afraid. The next day, Mr. Randall and I filed the full civil suit. We weren't bluffing anymore. We were pursuing every charge the law would allow. Attempted fraud, unauthorized deed transfer, forgery, identity misrepresentation. It helped that the notary who had signed off on the forged deed no longer worked at the agency listed, and we had confirmation they hadn't been practicing in months. Even the clerk from the county records office gave us a written statement describing the inconsistencies in their filing. We also subpoenaed Shane's phone records and pulled messages from the cloud backups Jason had helped me access. There were chats between Shane and a third party discussing ways to make Gavin leave, including forged repair notices and lies about code violations. In one, Shane even suggested planting pests in the attic and calling the city anonymously. That one made my stomach turn. All of it went to the judge in a massive file Randall titled Maynard versus Maynard and Associates. Because yes, Shane had actually formed an LLC 2 months prior under the name Legacy Family Holdings, with himself as CEO and Mom as the treasurer. They had been that confident. 3 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, I got an envelope in the mail from Shane's lawyer, different from the one who'd been at the house. This one had the nervous, apologetic energy of someone who knew they were trying to salvage a lost cause. Inside was a 5-paragraph letter, mostly legal fluff, but the key message was this. My client is willing to cease all further claims to the property and inheritance in exchange for a mutual agreement to drop the civil charges. We hope to resolve this amicably. I didn't even finish reading it before sending it to Randall with one line. Let them swing. We declined the offer. Politely, but firmly. And that's when everything started to crumble. First, Shane lost his job. His employer had been contacted by the attorney representing the real estate firm that almost got involved in flipping my house. Turns out they didn't like being tied to a potential fraud case and pulled their funding from Shane's LLC, which was already bleeding money. Then came the investigation into his company's finances. Turns out he hadn't just planned to flip my house. He'd already accepted investments from 3 silent partners, promising them a percentage of the resale. When they found out the entire plan had been based on a forged deed and fake transfer, they sued him for breach of contract and misrepresentation. The combined lawsuits were enough to put him in 6-figure debt. And Mom, well, things didn't go much better for her. When the charges came through officially, she was forced to lawyer up. Her accounts were frozen pending review of any suspicious withdrawals from past joint assets we'd once shared. She had to cash out her savings to pay the attorney fees. The same woman who once laughed about my frugal ways was suddenly trying to sell her car for half its value on Facebook Marketplace. But the part that stayed with me the most, more than the lawsuits, the injunctions, the loss of their reputations, was the letter. About 2 months after the case started moving through court, I got a handwritten envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper, shaky handwriting, written in black ink. It was from my mom. Dear Gavin, they say the things you regret most are the ones you never say. I don't know if that's true, but I do know I've said a lot of things I should have never said, and not said a lot of things I should have. Maybe you won't read this. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore. But I need to try. I was a terrible mother. Not just now. Not just because of what I did with the house. I've failed you in ways that will take a lifetime for me to even fully understand. I let you grow up thinking you didn't matter. I let Shane treat you like a punching bag and pretended it was just sibling stuff. I spent more time chasing men than raising my own son. And then you got older and smarter and successful, and I felt small. Less. You were everything I could have been. And instead of being proud, I got bitter. I let that bitterness grow. I let it twist into something that hurt you. I let Shane rope me into something I knew was wrong because I thought, deep down, you wouldn't fight back. But you did. You stood up for yourself in a way I never taught you to. You protected what was yours. You did what I never had the courage to do. And I'm sorry. Maybe that doesn't fix anything. I don't expect forgiveness. But I do hope, someday, you'll remember that I was human and broken and full of guilt even when I didn't show it. Love, Mom. I sat with that letter for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just let it sit there, open on the table, soaking in the weight of it all. Did I believe her? Maybe. Part of me did. Another part remembered that she only ever apologized when she had something to lose. But in that moment, it didn't matter. Because whether the apology was sincere or not, I finally understood that I wasn't responsible for her redemption. That was on her. I was done cleaning up their messes. Done trying to earn affection from people who only saw value in me when it was attached to a dollar sign. So I took the letter, folded it neatly, and placed it in the same red binder with the rest of the case records. Not to forget, but to remember how far I'd come. 6 months later, the civil suit closed in my favor. The judge ruled that both Shane and my mother had willfully and knowingly engaged in fraudulent behavior, and neither could make any future claims against me or the estate. Shane was ordered to pay restitution, and while I'll probably never see the full amount, it wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. I used a portion of the trust funds to set up a scholarship in my grandparents' name, dedicated to kids who grew up in unstable homes but found a way to keep going. It felt right. Full circle. And as for the house, it's still mine. Still quiet. Still creaky in all the familiar ways. I walk through it sometimes in the early mornings, barefoot on the hardwood, just listening to the silence. No more threats. No more knocks on the door. Just peace. I still drive the same Civic. Still drink instant coffee some mornings just because I like the taste. Still clip coupons. But I'm not the same man who once let guilt keep him quiet. I've learned that protecting yourself from toxic family isn't betrayal, it's survival. And sometimes, the only way to end a generational pattern is to burn the blueprint and build something better, on your own terms.